Hello everybody, tonight I'm going to tell you about a book that I haven't read, so this is a first because I'm going to talk to you about a book that I've listened to as an audiobook. It's called This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Now, before we go into this, I will let you in on a little secret, which isn't a secret that I meant to keep, but it's basically something that I don't really talk about that much, and that is that when I was 10 years old, I got attacked at school by another student who had always had some emotional problems and had also been known to have some violent tendencies, but nobody did anything about this because it was 1983 and, you know, nothing was ever done about this, and bullying didn't exist. And unfortunately, it was my turn to be beaten up. So this girl shoved me bodily into the wall, and I cracked my head, and I ended up in the ER, where they took an X-ray of my skull and found that it wasn't broken or fractured, and sent me on my merry way home. The problem was that I had sustained a really severe concussion. And as a result, I suffered all of the normal things like sensitivity to light, nausea, vomiting, but also an inability to read. And back then, it was pre-internet, so there were no audiobooks. There may have been some books on tape, but being 10 years old, I wouldn't have been able to afford them. And also, thankfully, there was no internet or remote learning because I wasn't even able to watch the TV. I don't think I could have coped with any form of digital device. So for 8 weeks, I spent most of my time in bed in a darkened room. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because Calcifer's mum, also known as Emmy, she's a booktuber and a great one at that, also suffered a severe concussion. I think hers must have been even more severe. I want to say in 2019, and she studied literature and she's since graduated. So for her, you know, being a literature student and being unable to read, so a lot of her symptoms reminded me of my own symptoms. Thankfully, today, we are much more advanced in our understanding of the severity of concussion and its short, mid and long-term effects, which can last a lifetime. She was able to continue her studies of literature by listening to the books that she had to study for uni on her mobile device. Now, I've had I don't know when I first got my Audible subscription. I do remember that I bought an audiobook of the Iliad, translated by Raoul Schrott and performed by Manfred Zapatka. And I may actually do a review of this, but that one I'm going to do in German because it's only available in German. I want to say 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and that's when I first got my Audible account, but I just bought this one book. I didn't take out a subscription. Then I did take out a subscription and I did download a couple of books, but I found it really difficult to find interesting books. That was before I discovered BookTube, and since then I've got many books that I would like to experience, but where I don't necessarily believe I need the physical copy. And This Poison Heart is one of those books. Now, This Poison Heart is the first part of a duology. The second part is called something with fate. This cruel fate, this crooked fate, this weird fate, something like that. And I'm definitely going to get this as well because I want to know how the story ends. It's a young adult novel, as far as I can tell, or maybe it's some people also say there's middle grade and then there's young adult. I don't know the first thing about the American school system, so I can't really tell where middle grade starts and finishes and where young adult starts and finishes. Because when I was a child, there was simply children's books and then there was everything else. So this idea of young adult literature is something that didn't exist in the 70s in Germany. You just read children's books and then you read everything else. So it's kind of funny because this book will remind you of the Iliad, and it may remind you of the most recent installments of Alice Baker, which is an RPG that we're playing in English on this channel, for interesting reasons. So number one, what is this book about? It is about a young girl, and here I'm unclear about how old she is, because she's definitely underage, because she needs to have legal guardians to sign paperwork for her. So she's not yet 18. In the beginning, I thought from the way she acts and the things she says, she would be 13, 14. Then later on, there is some romance, which is so cringy if she's really only 13 or 14, so she may be 16, 17, but then that doesn't gel with some of the things she does, so I'm unclear what her age is supposed to be. And her name is Briseis Green. Yes, and you know Briseis because we talked about her when we were discussing the Iliad. And Briseis Green lives in Brooklyn with her mother and mother. She is an open adoption, which apparently means that the birth mother could have seen who adopted the child and could have gotten in touch if she'd wanted to. And also, if there are changes in the life of the birth mother, for example, the birth mother dying and maybe wanting to bequeath something to the child, this could be done through the agency. So it's kind of open. Everybody knows who Briseis was adopted by. And her parents also never kept it from her that she was adopted and have been really open about it. And you know. Anyway, so her mom and her mum run a flower shop in Brooklyn. That's also where they live. And Briseis, from apparently a very, very early age, has had an affinity to plants. Now, this affinity manifests itself by flowers suddenly blossoming and becoming more colourful when she walks past them. Also, flowers turning their blossoms towards her, the grass being oh so much greener where she's standing, trees near, for example, her seat in the classroom on the outside, of course, keeping their leaves a lot longer in autumn than the other trees that are further away from her. But also her ability to put seeds into earth and then digging in her fingers and making stuff sprout at a very, very rapid pace, like watching roses grow, literally. But also her being able to revive dead plants. So she's got very green fingers. But to such a degree that it's definitely not natural and very magical or unnatural, let's put it this way, because, you know, and it's something that you can't hide, because whenever she goes somewhere, flowers and plants will just turn towards her. They pick up on her mood as well. So when she gets angry, her ivy basically starts acting up. And they live in Brooklyn, and the problem is, so it's basically the school is out for summer. She doesn't really have any friends because the people that she did know have found out what she can do, although she was trying to kind of hide it, which is difficult because obviously, you know, as soon as somebody starts, you know, like moving through grass and then the grass turns a very, very different shade of green and kind of like all the trees move towards her, then that's kind of obvious. So she has a big problem and she doesn't have any friends. And then there's also the issue of gentrification, because the rent's going up for the shop, but also for the flat that she lives in with her family. And they're kind of like really struggling to make ends meet. And then one day, a woman comes in and she introduces herself as a lawyer who is handling the estate of a Mrs. Kolchis or Miss Kolchis. So for those of you who have an eye for Greek names, Kolchis is of course an ancient Greek city and quite famous in legend. And Briseis, of course, is also a Greek name. And she says that she has an estate to bequeath to her. Well, somebody has bequeathed an estate to her, namely her birth mother died a long time ago, but she had a sister. And this sister is now dead and has left her an estate, 70 acres of land and a huge house in upstate New York, in a place called Rhinebeck, which I researched. It's real, it does exist, and it is a lot like it's described in the book. And its claim to fame is that in 2010, Chelsea Clinton got married there. And they're kind of thinking, okay, well, we're big city people, you know, moving from Brooklyn, which has 2 million inhabitants, apparently, to a place that has like 7,700 people. You know, that's going to be very different. But then again, they cannot really afford to stay where they are. And so they decide, since school's out for summer, let's just go there and see what it's like. So they go there, they pack up their things, well, some things, and they drive up to upstate New York, to Rhinebeck. They find the place, they go there, and it's an old house. It's a mansion. It's old. It's several, I would say, probably 200 years old or so. And it looks like it's not been lived in for a long time. So then the story proceeds to them exploring the house, which of course is really great. I mean, this idea of you go to a place that hasn't been lived in for a long time and you just go in there and you open each cupboard and you take out the stuff and you find, I mean, they find the secret door in the attic and, you know, stuff hidden behind fake walls. And they also find other things. They find that this house seems to have doubled as an apothecary. So that the Kolchis ladies, so her aunt and birth mother, seem to have been selling plants. And some of those plants are still there in kind of like jars, and they are highly poisonous. Because what Briseis has also noticed is she's immune to poison if it's plant-based. Because one day she was cultivating water hemlock in some park or other in the middle of Brooklyn, and she brings it home and she dissects it, and one of her mothers basically gives her a scare, and she cuts herself with a dirty scalpel, which still has some residue from the plant on it, and she thinks she should have died, but she didn't. She just felt a cold, tingly feeling, but she didn't die. So she realizes something's up, and basically she sees all of these very poisonous plants in the house. And she realizes that they are all poisonous, but also not all of them are poisonous, but even the poisonous ones do have medicinal purposes. As you all know, no effect without a side effect. And one man's poison is another man's medicine, and it's all in the dose. Anyway, so basically, in the next couple of chapters, they discover the house. She discovers the venom garden, because there's a poisonous garden full of poisonous plants, which are really aggressive. And they also discover that there is a young person, a female person, standing there with silvery hair in the driveway. But when they go outside, she's vanished. And so they start living there, and it becomes clearer and clearer that there is something strange going on, because people, Briseis ends up running into a guy with a machete who then kind of attacks her, but she gets rescued by the plants, but he doesn't really mean to attack her, so it's kind of weird. She also meets a guy in town who sits in as a help in the bookshop. I don't know how old he is. He doesn't seem to be a grown-up yet. And basically, at some point, the book starts meandering. There are different people that come in, but you can always tell that there is something going on, that there is some kind of underlying threat maybe, or something like that. And to cut a long story short, this guy Carter has a mother who turns out to be the real estate agent, who again turns out to be the villain. And it also turns out, as they walk around in the house, that something seems to be up with the Kolchis women, and that they are somehow related to Medea. And it turns out, as a matter of fact, that Briseis is the last daughter of, or granddaughter of Medea herself, who of course is a master poisoner, wife to Jason, killed her children, blah, 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 blah. And apparently a worshipper of Hecate. Now, Hecate is, of course, the person that plays an important role in Alice Baker, because Hecate is, on the one hand, a goddess with three faces, but also sometimes she's considered three goddesses, like the Astarte, three goddesses, like the Moirai, like the Norns. So basically it's this idea of an old triad of goddesses that are older than anything and anyone. Basically, it turns out that they also have one more really weird plant. And this plant looks like a human heart. And it's called the Absyrtos heart. Now, Absyrtos or Axyrtos, depending on the source that you're reading, is the brother of Medea. And he was killed and then cut up into 6 pieces. And it turns out that the girl with the silvery hair that they meet on their first evening there was a very close friend and possibly lover of one of the very old Kolchis ancestors who lived in the 17th century. And this girl was going to die of the plague or a plague. And this Kolchis woman was going to save her life by giving her the Absyrtus heart, its essence, to drink. So she survives. But the problem is she doesn't only survive, but she becomes immortal and stays in the body of a 17-year-old. Now, the problem, and this is where the cringe-worthiness comes in, this 17-year-old falls in love, like, instantaneously with Briseis, which is not a problem. Love at first sight does exist. But this whole romance side plot is so cringe-worthily written, especially since I'm unclear as to how old Briseis actually is. And it doesn't feel like it's a healthy relationship. It doesn't feel like, because you have this really old, immortal being that may look like she's 17, but she's definitely not 17 on an emotional level. And then you've got this girl who is anywhere between 13 and 16 and who is very much in that age range mentally. I just didn't like that part, and I'm glad that it didn't get too focused, but it wasn't just subtext. The subtext became text very quickly, and I just didn't feel it was appropriate in a way, and it took away from my enjoyment of the story. This whole romance thing should have been left out. Because for me it was very cringeworthy. But what happens is that Carter's mother turns out to be the real estate lawyer that gave her the keys and access to the building and to the property. And she turns out to believe that she, in fact, is a direct descendant of Jason. And she wants to... and who in turn is related to Hermes. I didn't verify this. I'm not quite sure if he did have any connection with Hermes, but she believes that she should be an immortal, and for this she needs the Absyrtus heart that she needs to ingest, and then she becomes immortal. But she needs to access the heart, and she can't because she's not an immortal yet, and the heart is hidden in the poison garden. And the poison garden isn't just a garden full of poisonous plants, but those plants will attack you. There is spores in the air. When you breathe them in, you will die. So really serious stuff. And so basically she kidnaps Briseis' mum and forces her to go into the poison garden and get her the heart and distill it into some kind of liquid that she can then imbibe. But then things go wrong and she kills her mother. And then the door opens and an 11-foot tall woman walks in with a dog. And this is actually Hecate herself. She takes, presumably, she takes Carter's mother to hell. And unfortunately, I forget Carter's mother's name. And she says that she can keep Briseis' mum not alive because she's dead, but she can preserve her body for a while. I think it's 1 month. And if in the meantime she can manage to get all 6 pieces of Absyrtus back, because Absyrtus is Medea's brother, so he's also Hecate's son, because it turns out that Medea isn't really a worshipper of Hecate, or was, but she was her daughter. So Medea is half god. So is Absyrtus. And if she manages to get Absyrtus' 6 pieces together within a month, Hecate will manage to revive Briseis' mum. Now, they have 2 pieces because they have the girl with the silver hair, whose name I forget, and they've got the Absyrtus heart. So they still need 4 more pieces. And as she was exploring the house, she had actually found a map, and there had been like little pins put into it. But it's only mentioned in passing, so it's kind of like, yes, you realize it, and then when she picks it up later, it makes perfect sense. But as she's explaining it and as she's narrating her passage through the house, you don't really pay any attention. So that's where we're at the moment. That's the ending of the book. Now, of course, I need to wait for the 12th to come around, because then I will get another item on my list that I can pick up. So I'm going to pick up the second part of this duology, because I really want to know how it ends. So how do I like it? Well, I think it's nicely written. I think the concept is interesting. We will just overlook the cringiness of the romance, because that really was absolutely cringeworthy and completely unnecessary. And I would say it's very entertaining. It's a young adult children's book, whatever you want to call it, and it's a nice read. And I like how they have woven in the mythology of ancient Greek culture, because that's basically where my heart has always been. I really like this. I really like meeting some of the ancient Greek names and stories. I really like what she did with the botany part of things, because I checked up on some of her flowers that she mentions, and they all exist except for the Absyrtus heart, of course, because that doesn't exist. But there is this one scene where she walks through this forest and she comes upon a clearing, and it's kind of like a little bit, the light isn't so clear, and she believes that she sees goblins or some kind of monsters that are sitting there. And she describes a plant. And I'm like, that is, if I saw this in the dead of night or in dusk or dawn, I would be surprised and I would be frightened too. Very well done. And just for laughs, I Googled the plant, and it turns out A, the plant does exist, and B, it looks exactly like she describes it, and it does look very spooky. So I was like, she really did her research when she talks about the plants, and that's nice. I like it when you have fantasy, but it's set in our world, it's set in the real world, but everything that isn't the fantastical part is correct, can be researched, can be found. Rhinebeck does exist. Brooklyn does exist, of course, we know that. The descriptions of Rhinebeck match the information you get on Google Maps or on Google or on Wikipedia. That's what I like. This is how fantasy should be. You have to have everything else completely believable and correct to make the leap of faith into the fantastical work, and to make it possible for me to suspend my disbelief. And she does that fantastically. And this is something that I sometimes feel is lacking in some of modern fantasies, where they just, throw stuff on you where you kind of go, really? I mean, you want me to believe all this, but then when it comes to the really basic stuff, you didn't do your research, don't even start with me. So I would recommend this, especially if you've got kids. They will love this, I'm pretty sure. But I will also want to close off with a personal remark, because I would like to say that this is a really good example of representation, because it is important to recognize that lots of minorities are not recognized and represented. Still, to this day, it's getting better, but you have to applaud every single time somebody does it to make it normal. Briseis and her mums and all of the Colchis women are African American. And it is mentioned, like when they are described, what their skin looks like. But it's the norm. It's not like made a political point. It's not done in such a way as to say, but everybody else was white, but they were not. It's just that they happen to meet mainly black people. There's also a mention of defunding the police in Rhinebeck, which I had to check what this means, but this seems to come from the Black Lives Matter movement. So they have defunded the police in this area and have replaced it with a kind of office bureau, whatever, that tries to take care of people's concerns in a different way. And Dr. Grant is one of those people, and she's also black. That's mentioned in passing. It's never made a political point. Then, of course, you have very many, or most of the characters are female. Again, very nice representation there. And also you have an LGBTQ couple, mum and Mo, who basically, yes, they are married. They have a daughter that they adopted, that they're completely open about as well. But it represents normal family life with all of the normal problems that everybody has, regardless of their sexual orientation. Rising rents, gentrification, problems in your job, not being able to afford the electricity that is required if you run a plant shop or a flower shop, because prices have been rising. Things like that. And you kind of get this, the fact that they are gay doesn't really matter. It's just one of many, many aspects of their lives, but it's not the defining one, and it's not made the central point of the story. It's not a problem. It just so happens, And I think this is where we need to move to make things that used to be minority and always political and relevant, turn them into normalness, to make sure that they get the representation. And so this is also something that I would like to applaud, because it's done in a very elegant way and in a very smooth way. And we should see more of this. So that's all from my side for this Poison Heart by, I keep getting a name wrong, Kaylin Bayron. Kaylin Bayron or Bayron. And I listened to the audiobook. It was narrated by a wonderful speaker. The voice acting is superb. I really enjoyed it. And you can get it on Audible. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye.